Hello and welcome again. This is Amr Deep. I'm the UX dinosaur. Welcome to the new episode. And this episode also in English. I'm very happy with my friend, colleague, and I can't find words actually to describe today's episode. And today's friend. We will talk about the UX maturity, and let me introduce a bit about the topic, and also I will introduce a little bit about my guest here. The topic will talk about the UX maturity because me and my guest actually today, we've been through this journey of the UX maturity in different areas in the world, and we have met into one of those very exciting journey about UX maturity and the design maturity in one of the great organizations that we have worked in. So I really appreciated this UX maturity concept and seeing this happen in real life and how actually this can be impacting many teams in different levels. And it was an eye-opener for me, at least, to see how the UX maturity can change people's mind, their perspective, and how this impact on how you deliver a final product. It's a long journey, and you need to know this as a team lead or a technical lead or a strategy owner of a product. Because the UX maturity usually impact the final product, which is sometimes is far away from day-to-day work. So it's a kind of understanding of the deep impact and the deep effect of having something that's very healthy in the body of your organization. My friend today, I call him the very educated friend of me because he is well educated and he likes to read a lot and he goes very deeply into every topic that he reads about. And maybe because of his great mindset and because he is a very long time researcher, he had all of the opportunity to be everything in research. Today I will have a meeting with my friend Dennis Nordshorn. And Dennis is... as I told you, he had the opportunity to go through all of those UX maturity in different levels, in different organizations. So he has a perspective in this. I will take just a couple of seconds break to move to Dennis and welcome him into our episode. Don't go anywhere and don't forget, share, like, subscribe, and your comments, please. And here we are. Dennis, how are you doing?
Hi, Amber. Doing well, thank you. How are you?
I'm doing great, especially when I see you. You know that I'm always happy to see you, and I'm really proud. I feel the honor having you in my podcast. It's actually I'm thinking of having this for over a year now to have you in my podcast, but I didn't have a podcast at that time.
Thank you. Well, thanks for inviting me. I'm happy to be here.
A pleasure. But if you can give us a few words about yourself so everyone can also know about you.
Yeah, well, I mean, yeah, I'm a UX researcher first and foremost. I've been a UX researcher now for almost 20 years. And, born and raised in Denmark, which is where I am now, working with you. And been here in Denmark for 7 years, working in various companies, always doing UX research. Prior to this, I was 10 years in America, also doing research over there, and a few years in Australia before that. Education-wise, I have a master's in IT product design, so not just digital design, but also industrial design, that sort of product, and a bachelor in linguistic anthropology, which is very, very heavy on theory and research. And so that's why when you take those two and combine them, you get this UX research kind of profile, which is how I fell into it originally.
I wasn't wrong when I say that you were my well-educated friend. So
I'm one of them, maybe.
That sounds amazing, and I would also to know how this journey of your life, going through different countries, different organizations, and how this perspective impacted your understanding of the UX maturity in general.
Yeah, I mean, and like you said, it really was a journey, because I think having seen and having been able to contrast different organizations, different sizes, different industries, and being able to contrast how that all, how those companies operated in different contexts, in different countries, really led me to see how important UX maturity is, and how much of a difference it can make for companies that have taken the leap and have increased their maturity. And just seeing the products that come from an organization where the maturity is high, compared to products that are still coming from organizations that are struggling.
Actually, let's set the scene first. What would be the UX maturity versus design maturity?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting question. I don't know too much about design maturity, but I would say UX maturity, at least for me, is really about the mindset of an organization. I mean, everybody involved in creating a product in an organization, and how they basically value their users, and how they really consider their users when creating products. And I think that is ultimately, our role as good researchers, I would say, is to facilitate that process, to make sure that everybody feels like they have empathy for their end users, and really feel like they get to know their audience. And I think the more that sort of mindset and work processes permeate throughout an organization, the more mature they are in their UX research. So you'll see better integration of research and design. You'll see how teams become more data-driven, and how there are just continuous improvement and continuous discovery happening in those organizations.
Yes, and that sounds to me that it differs from different levels in the organization. So if you have one team that have this a good UX maturity, it doesn't help. It should be on different levels on the organization. This is what I understand.
I would say so. I think it is on an organizational level, but I think it's also quite common that you will see that if you have a larger organization with multiple divisions, multiple product teams, you will see there's often, in my experience at least, a discrepancy between how mature they all are.
And does the organization size matter? Is it when it's a small startup, for example, or larger organization, or non-profit organization? Does those sizes and categories differ?
I don't think so. I don't think from my experience, I've seen very small companies be very, very mature, but I've also seen some that were not. And I've seen very large companies be very mature, and I've also seen a lot of large companies that were not. So I don't believe size necessarily is the driving factor or a factor in determining what the UX maturity of an organization is.
And what would be the definitive factor then?
Yeah, but like I said, I think it really is the mindset. I think it is all about the mindset of the people in charge of creating products in those companies, and just seeing how do they work with the product development process, and how do they include their end users in that process? Do they listen to them? Do they have listening sessions? Do they do a lot of these things? Do they always consider, hey, do we know this to be true from our end users' perspective? And if not, what are we going to do to actually go out and investigate this? And I think that, to me, has been the biggest factor in determining whether a organization or even a team was user-centric or not.
But this also requires not only the understanding, but also sometimes the budget, maybe the people, they'll have actually to be pioneers, what it takes to make a team that have this maturity or a better UX maturity at least.
Yeah, and that's a good question, because I think budget definitely is a big part of it. But I think ultimately any team, if wanting to get on this UX maturity growth journey, can certainly go ahead and join that journey, because it can be quite small. It starts quite small. Find one or two users that you can reach out to and include in your product development cycle, your product design processes, and just start to listen to them, start to show them what you're working on, share your ideas with them, and get quick feedback and repeated feedback that way. And certainly you can start to grow from there. I do not believe that you need a big budget in order to grow your UX maturity. And I do not even believe that you have to do very professional UX research from the get-go when you're just starting to grow your maturity.
But the UX maturity relates to, does the UX, and let me rephrase it as a question. Does the UX maturity related to the end product or to the process?
I think the maturity, I think the product is an outcome of the maturity. The maturity is talking about the creators of the product.
Yes.
So that means that if this is something the team, if they start developing a product and they are mature, they will take in the right processes, they will have the right values, they will listen to their users, they will have a iterative, quick cycle sort of a test and release process, which ultimately will have an impact on the product. So I think you can't fully distinguish those. If you are a mature team, you should be able to see that ultimately will create a difference in the product that's being released.
Yeah. And there is a UX maturity ladder, and you need to define this ladder and find where you are into this one. Maybe also give us few words about this and how important is to understand where you are into this ladder.
Exactly. And I think that's my analogy for that is really to say it's kind of like, I mean, these days we have Google Maps, so it's easy enough on our phone to just go in and figure out where we're going.
Yeah.
But back in the old days, before we had digital maps, we all had this big map we had to roll out, and we had to figure out, well, how do we get to where we're going? But the first thing we had to figure out is, where are we before we chart out our path towards where we're going? And I think that's ultimately what a ladder to me is. It's a way for us to figure out, well, where on this journey towards whatever nirvana of UX maturity is, where are we, and how do we then ultimately get to where we're going? Because not all organizations need to be at the very highest rung of that ladder. I think there can certainly be use cases where, or cases where an organization would be fine just being a step below or even 2 steps below.
Yeah.
But sort of breaking that journey up and say, in order to get there, we need to do these things. But before you can do that, you really need to map out where you are.
Actually, it relates to those maps, either to drive or either to look into the map. When you have those paper maps, so you need to stop, you need to roll over and find where you are. Is it the same to the UX maturity? So we need to stop everything to see where you are? Can't we drive and do it while we're driving?
No, we should probably do it while we're driving. I certainly do not believe that it's a matter of stopping and like you said, pulling over the car. But it is something to figure out as we move along and always, almost like on an continuous basis, try to evaluate where are we on this journey and are we making progress? Are we working on the right things that are getting us, to the destination that we want to go to? So if we use the analogy again of a map and pulling over the car, it's okay if you can look at the map while you're driving, but at the same time, you always have to evaluate when you do that you're driving in the right direction. Because if you look at the map and you figure out, okay, here's the way, and you're charting all that out, but you're actually going in the opposite direction, then you have to figure out immediately how to turn the car around. And I think that also applies here. If you find that you're doing things that are counter-productive to what you want to do with your UX maturity growth, it's quite important that you catch that early and adjust course as quickly as possible.
Yeah, that's a great analogy also to use, and driving the user experience maturity also needs different roles, different partnerships. We will talk about this after a few seconds. We will take a quick break and come back to you. And back to you. And as I said before this, as we're driving, maybe we need provider, some restaurant, or someone who helps us into this journey. I believe in the context of digital or big organization that we are working on right now, maybe the leadership is doing all of this. How do you see the leadership role and different parties and different teams around the UX team can play role into the UX maturity?
I think leadership is crucial. I think ultimately there has to be, we had the analogy of driving on the road and having a map. I think ultimately it's the same thing here. You need to have that driver that keeps moving the team, the department, the organization, whatever sort of size we're looking at, moving them forward in this quest for UX maturity. And at the same time, you need to have someone who's got the eye on the map. Now, sometimes that leader can be the same person and say, okay, I'm going to evaluate where we are. I'm going to set a destination for where we want to go, and I'm going to drive us towards that. But it can also be different, right? So you can have an entire team, typically of someone who actually understands the area, understands the product development process, and maybe is within UX, either designers, strategists, researchers, but has some sort of fundamental understanding of what is required for the teams to move up the ladder of UX maturity, and help them drive this process. And that's where I think that leadership is incredibly important. There needs to be someone who charts the path and sets the steps required in order to move in that direction.
Sounds amazing and very true. I guess in my experience, at least, I found those people who have this willing, even if it was one person. And I remember an example. Of course, we cannot mention some names, but there's some great example that we have worked with. A person who had knew nothing about UX, but he was in a very good leading position, and he have the belief to deliver the highest quality. And once he had this understanding of what could be the best of having UX and UX maturity, he started the journey, and I believe he made a great difference into this. And I would like to hear more good examples from your experience. If you have good examples also to show how could be the good UX maturity?
And to start that journey towards, like you said, I think it typically starts with awareness. It's being aware of obviously the benefits of being a very mature UX organization. Like I said, it should really improve the products overall. But until you get there, not everybody sees the the efforts of growing that maturity as very important, and may even see it as wasteful, because even though you can do it on a very scaled down sort of effort level,
Yeah.
it still needs something. You still need to spend some time and some resources on this, and so there's no way out of that. And ultimately, that's an investment. That's an investment you make for your end users and for your product to make it better. So it's very well spent efforts, but you need to be able to get there to the point, and need to be able to persuade certain people around you that may otherwise want you to not spend the effort on this, and have that influence to say, we can make a difference by doing these things. We can start up a movement here, and we can make a change internally to our organization, which again is an investment, and
Yes.
will ultimately lead to better products and lead to more streamlined processes for our team in developing products that address user needs and that are easy to use.
I guess we need also to speak the same language sometimes. So sometimes we need to speak to business or leadership team as what would they get out of this, what is the return on investment here, how they can get their money back if they follow this. Do you agree to this?
Yes, absolutely, as much as we can. But I think ultimately it's difficult for design to say, well, this much money spent on this, and this much money earned on this. In the same way that you probably can't do the same, and I don't know that much about engineering, but I don't recall in the 20 years I've worked in this having ever had an engineer say, well, this is the return on investment for engineering, because engineering ultimately is what makes the thing work. And so everybody agrees engineering is very important.
Yes.
It's just a shame that UX is not quite in that same ballpark, because it still feels like something for a lot of people that can be cut out. But I think UX ultimately is a risk mitigation discipline. Like, we mitigate the risk of developing products and spending a lot of money on building products and launching them that may not even be used because they're not applicable to our end users.
Yeah.
And I think if you can somehow just make up these scenarios and present those to the end leaders and say, look, what happens if we develop this product? How much money will we have spent on building a product? Take all the salaries of all the people involved over time into account. Take all the lost revenues that we could have been earning if we build a better product from get-go. Put that together, throw it out there and say, this is the amount of money that we're spending on this. If we fail, how much will this then cost us compared to the tiny little bit that it might cost us from doing UX from the beginning? Few hours here, few hours there. Maybe we buy a bottle of wine or some chocolate for an end user to come in and talk to us.
Yeah.
Those costs are really very, very small in comparison, and usually that's a good way to try and at least set up some scenarios around the return on investment that UX can provide a team with.
At least you should have in your organization some strategies to start the UX maturity and how to grow the UX maturity. Any secret sauce or advices for organizations in different levels? And now I know, I have learned now, it doesn't matter how big is the organization, but what would be the strategies, how they grow their UX maturity, in your opinion?
Yeah, I think it's a couple of things. I think the first thing is really to find out, what is your destination? We talked about, like, where do we want to go? And in that, also figure out, where are we now? Like, are we all the way down? Is there sort of, are we doing fairly well, but there are some things we could be doing better, or are we actually doing quite well? So those two things I would say are quite important.
Yeah.
The next for me is to then create a chart discourse of how are we going to get there. If you are in a very low mature organization, it's quite difficult to do a big leap up to being super mature.
Yeah.
And I think I've seen some articles saying that this journey can take upwards of more than 10 years. I think even 15 or 20 years on some accounts to make that entire journey and move an organization in that direction. So what I would argue is break it up. Do a roadmap, just like you probably would work with various product owners or product managers that are really good at creating a roadmap and breaking down what is required for us to get there.
Yeah.
Choose the first things and focus on them. And maybe that is, hey, we're going to involve end users every 2 weeks. Every sprint, we need to talk to some users. Maybe it's saying, hey, we need to get analytics on our product so we can actually see what's going on. Maybe it's just saying, hey, we actually need a dedicated designer to work on this. So it's not just developers coming up with whatever design we need. Maybe it's something else entirely, some sort of program. But break it down and figure out what needs to happen for us to meet this.
Yeah.
That's the second step. And the third and final step, I would argue, is, again, we talked about the leadership. Having a leader either act as a coach or get someone else in that really understands how to progress teams in this journey towards UX maturity and have them coach the team in that journey. And I think that is ultimately really pivotal. Someone who can say, hey, just like if you want to learn tennis, even the best tennis players in the world has a coach. Because coaches see things that you don't necessarily see yourself when you're right in the middle of a battle or a game, right? But you're right in the middle of it, and it can be very difficult to extract yourself and kind of get the overview and see where do we need to move next. So that's where the coach can really prove valuable, to just come in and say, hey, listen, this is how we do it, and keep reminding you, because quite often these things are about changing habits. And if an organization's been doing product development the same way for 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, they're not going to change their habits overnight. And that's why a lot of repetition is going to be quite important. And so that's would be those 3 steps as my breakdown for getting this UX maturity on the way.
Yeah. And by changing habits, does it mean, or does it require a lot of change management effort?
I would absolutely say it does. It does. And I think that's where the leader we talked about earlier towards driving this growth of UX maturity, I think needs to really be able to facilitate change management. Probably more important than anything, they need to be an agent of change and need to be able to go in and actually have influence of the people around them. Because as we maybe talked a bit about when we were talking about the whole definition of UX maturity, for me, UX maturity doesn't just sit with a designer or the product owner. It's the entire team. It's developers, it's front-end enders, it's strategists, it's solution and marketing. I mean, whatever you can come up with there, it's a lot of different roles, but at the end of the day, they're all involved in creating a product. So that means everyone who's involved in that process needs to be able to have the same values and need to be able to understand the value of involving users in some sort of iterative way. And ultimately, that's what we're talking about.
Agree. But some people in some organization believe tools is, by providing tools, is actually providing UX maturity. And this is one of the myths. I guess we have also some misconceptions and myths around the UX maturity in general. And I guess you met some of those.
Yeah, and I think as we've seen, Amar, I think tools for me is a means to an end. And we, I know, have worked in teams where we felt, okay, if we get this, if we get a design system, if we just get analytics, then we're getting on the path to UX maturity. But as we've talked about before, I think getting a hammer doesn't turn you into a carpenter. And I think it's difficult to be a great carpenter without a hammer, but getting a hammer doesn't make you a great carpenter. And I think tools is just, it's an aid. It's a way for you to do what it is you need to do better, but it's the experience and it's the knowledge and just the, the education, the awareness of what it is you need to do ultimately that's going to make the big difference. And then it's just up to you to find the tools that can best help you and support you in that process.
Exactly. Because some organizations just provide a big tool or bring, how to bring it, the biggest hammer ever without any knowledge for their people actually to build a house. And this is what happened when you bring a tool and just roll the tool for everyone, and you have the data but you don't analyze it or you don't use it or don't translate it into a product. You simply did nothing. You're not even look into where you are, even this. So a lot of those misses and challenges also into those some organization that they believe they did their job by having a tool or someone on top of this. But I guess also it needs a continuous support. It's like a plant need to grow.
Absolutely. And I think that's where, again, you need to have those people invested in using those tools and knowing exactly how those tools can be applied. And that's where I would always argue, instead of buying the best tool for every little thing, when you're starting your journey towards growing UX maturity, find the small hammer. I mean, use a rock, to use the analogy, if that's what helps you build whatever it is you're building, and then grow to the bigger hammer, grow into that big sledgehammer at the end, because the risk is really that you end up spending a lot of money on buying this big sledgehammer and nobody knows what it can do, what it can be used for. Yeah. And it becomes counterintuitive, and maybe it becomes a little scary for a lot of people.
Yes,
and that means it's just wasted resources. Instead, of spending, because some of these tools are really expensive. Instead of spending a lot of money on that, spend the money on hiring someone who can actually wield the hammer, so that once the investment for that comes, you already have the person ready to take over.
Yeah. My favorite part is actually to understand if I'm doing the right thing or not, is to put some metrics to whatever that I'm doing. So how teams or organizations actually know if they are on the right track or not? What are the metrics? What are the measures to know if they are on the right UX track?
The track towards growing UX maturity. And I think it's very difficult. I know if you do a quick Google search on evaluating UX maturity, you will be able to find different evaluation surveys or different evaluation schemes. And there's, for instance, interactiondesign.org, which is a great resource. They have various ladders, different models of UX maturity ready. They also have different evaluation schemes ready, so you can take those and you can measure. Also, you and I, we were in a situation where we didn't have that at some point when we grew our or tried to grow the team's UX maturity. So what we ended up doing is, again, we looked at the scale of where we wanted to go. We set the nirvana of what good UX maturity was for our team, and we broke it down. We started saying what is required. We broke down those steps, and we said, okay, can we create a survey that we can send out to all the different product teams and have them self-evaluate if they do some of these things? Do they listen to their customers? Do they have quantitative measures in place? Do they have good UX KPIs that they follow. And so this in itself doesn't necessarily create a KPI to follow, but if nothing else, it should give you some sort of indicator of progress. If you can send out a survey and say, are we actually making the right steps towards what we've defined to be a nirvana, and make these little, take these little samples every 6 months, once a year, whatever cadence seems to work for the team. But as a way to see, okay, can we move the needle in the right direction here?
Yeah. And I guess this also very important techniques that you have mentioned here, having those samples, analysis, communicating to different teams, reversing from the goal to where we are. All of those techniques are needed to actually communicate the UX maturity to others and speak the same language to the leadership team, because I've seen also many of the UX professionals, they actually do a very good UX work, but they are like isolated. They are not actually communicating this to different teams around or the leadership on the top. So they actually don't go anywhere with their organization. So you need to speak the same language. You need to have some of those techniques, strategies, and speak the same language. And that's why we have mentioned this, the budget, the tools, numbers, analysis, all of this for also the UX professionals who are looking forward to have an environment around them is mature enough, is to encourage them to actually deliver better UX and better products and have a matured organization. It's also part of this on you. You take the responsibility actually to push things forward. I have seen it in some organizations with some UX professionals. They just look from the technical point of view. I'm technically very good, but I just complain about the organization. Yeah. Have you met some of those professionals or people just lean not to talk about the UX in general and how to push the things? Because not every organization is actually would like to have this UX maturity. They believe it's a big challenge for them.
Yeah, exactly. And I think different organizations have different cultures, and I certainly respect that. And it's really about making that transformation at the end of the day and finding that person that can drive this transformation. And so yes, and certainly there are teams that have very, very good UX designers who can make impeccable prototypes that look fantastic. But if they lack the skill to build relationships with the other teams, if they lack the skill to influence teams and actually negotiate as to why this is the best design, then that's sort of a loss at the end of the day, right? You can be the world's best singer, but if you are just refusing to go on stage and only wants to sing when you're in the shower, then unfortunately you're not really using the skill you have to your fullest. And it's the same with the UX designer. Or anyone creating designs for that matter. It's like you can be the world's best designer, but if you cannot go out and convince people as to why is what I've done a good design, build those relationships and not be pragmatic, but listen to whatever reluctance you may get back, because it's quite often that you'll hear someone say, I don't think that's true, or I don't believe, or, well, we've tried that 10 years ago and it didn't work. And you're like, yeah, we tried it 10 years ago. The situation was different. But you need to listen to that argument, and you need to be able to have a rational explanation as to why did we do things, and also maybe a little bit of flexibility to negotiate and take the steps one by one. Say, okay, listen, maybe we don't do the full design. I'm willing to downscale these 5 things here, but I would like to bring these 5 things forward. And then maybe next time you get to bring 8 things forward, and so on and so forth. So see it as a negotiation and just as again, the transformation that's required in order to really grow that team and make them aware, make them understand why it's important to be user-centric, and why it's important to grow that UX maturity.
Yes, agree. Maybe my final question then would be about, I'm usually asking this question about the relation of AI and the rise of AI now with the UX maturity, with
Yes.
UX in general, and especially UX maturity. How do you see the future of the UX maturity within those AI things that running around?
Yeah, it's quite interesting, isn't it? Because I think we've seen now a lot of people say that with AI, it's rendering designers, you know, kind of a little bit more like just I wouldn't say useless, but certainly a little bit on the outskirts of what they have been. And my point to that is, well, I think we saw the same thing when people started talking about design systems or
Okay.
whatever. And I think designers are important, and they will be important, because AI, first of all, AI tends to only look at the data that's available to them.
Mm.
Designers think about what could be. So we're thinking innovation, we're thinking new use cases, we're thinking new products. We're not only thinking about how can we take old products and make them slightly different, we're also thinking, okay, here's a new problem. This user has a new challenge. How can we create a good solution for
Yeah.
that? Certainly AI is a tool. It's a hammer in our toolbox, but it is not the end all be all. I do not believe that as AI is right now, that it'll replace the the relationship building, the listening, the human empathy that a good designer will bring to the table, and say, okay, we're listening to our users. We understand that even though our users say they want one thing, what they really need may be something else. But
Yes.
that's okay, because them saying they want one thing helps us to understand that they need something else. AI does not read between the lines at this point. So I think it may be there may be a day where AI can do all these things, but in my point of view, I would say those days are still quite far away.
That sounds a relief for a lot of people I know.
Yeah, and what I will say though, Amr, is I think it is definitely a tool in our toolbox, and I think it is incumbent upon us to use it to our advantage, because
Exactly.
it can also be a big help for us. But if there's anyone out there that's considering firing a UXer right now and just using AI, I think technically AI can do a lot. It can also code, but you probably also wouldn't get rid of your developer, right? And just rely on AI. So I do not believe we're there. I think you still need a person who understands this discipline, understands the goal of the product, to ask the right questions for AI to really yield anything that's usable.
Yes.
And even then, you need to have a critical mind behind it, and you need to really validate what comes out. And that's where a good UXer has those skills already and can really, take that to the next level, rather than just rely on that being the end all be all.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess AI will be a magical tool that can form for different shapes and sizes, that fits different businesses and different organizations. That helps a lot to grow the UX maturity. And I agree with you, it will not replace designers or UX professionals to go through the UX maturity journey. And we will see about the future, and maybe we'll have another time when we discuss more about the AI and the relation to the UX in general in another episode. But I would like to thank you very much for today and for your time. And I'm really, really happy having you on the podcast, and I really enjoyed the talk with you. And I believe everyone will see this, will really be happy and enjoying the every minute of this.
Thank you very much, Amar. I enjoyed it too, and I hope it was of some value. And I absolutely do hope that sometime in the future we get the chance to sit down together again, and maybe I'll have to eat my words, but now it's recorded and documented, I guess. So I'll just have to see. Maybe I'll have to eat my words later and say, you know what, I was wrong about AI. But I do hope that we get the chance to have that conversation someday.
Yeah. Who knows? But future will bring a lot of stuff, and we will be ready for this. Thank you
We'll
again,
do our best for sure.
and don't leave us. I will be right back after a couple of seconds. See you. And welcome back. It was fantastic episode. I really had the pleasure to learn. Every time I meet Dennis, actually, I learn something new, and he's giving us all of those insight about the future and about the past as well. So we had the opportunity now to learn that even the best tennis players or professionals also need a coach. That's really important when you look into the UX maturity and your journey. You need to know where you are. You need to see the reflection of what you're doing. You need to look far in the future and to see how you make it happen, because it will not reflect on day-to-day task only, but also reflect on your future as an organization. I guess the UX maturity is something that fill in the spaces between all your tools, your teams, and your capabilities, and also brings you a new level of what you're really able to do. Great examples are there and how they actually follow the UX maturity. And for you who are following this podcast or looking to this episode right now, remember this, your role, your responsibility also to push this forward and drive this and communicate to different teams. All it needs, as I also agree totally with Dennis, it's only the empathy. So you need the empathy to start this. Empathy with the user, empathy with your leadership, and talk the same language and make it happen. I would like to hear more from your comments. If you have any questions, give me all your comments. I can also let you ask those questions to Dennis. Here in the description box, you will find a link to his profile. I'm really happy that I had this opportunity to talk to him and talk to you all, and looking forward to hear from you. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and all your comments. Thank you very much, and talk to you later.